Hey everybody, this is Matthew, and in this video we're going to tackle one of the most complicated topics in all of Contractum, the home inspection, and radon, but that's much simpler. The home inspection is probably the biggest source of frustration and anxiety of any of the forms that we deal with. And we're going to be dealing with the actual, in this particular video, with the actual form itself, to what do you put on the blanks and all that stuff we'll get to. But I'm going to do a different video on how do you write up the demands that you have. So this is going to be, because this one's going to be a little longer anyways, this one is going to focus strictly on the form in question and those subparagraphs that surround it, and then we'll do a different video on how do I actually write up the agreement that we have to negotiate, or the repair we have to agree to. So I want to start back in the core contract, in the residential sales contract, under paragraph 10. Oh, there's a question here. The question is, and I've covered this in another video when we got to this paragraph, but I wanted to do it again because it relates specifically to the home inspection. And the paragraph says, except as otherwise specified, seller will deliver the property free and clear of trash, debris, broom cleaned, substantially same physical condition as of, or to be determined as of, the date of offer or the date of the home inspection. So the seller, of course, wants this as is to be later. The further along down they would want it to be as is as of the day of closing if they could. Because it limits their liability. The buyer and seller here are looking for different things. So let me, I actually did a little chart here to help us out with this. So this is the as-is time frame. So let's say, and I know they're 45-day closing, I'm going to say 30 for the intent of this particular video. So I've got a 30-day closing, right? From here to here, 30 days. And I got a home inspection on day 10. And so there are two options. And one is I want it to be as is, as of this period here, from the date of offer until home inspection, or I want it as is from home inspection until closing. Now, again, the seller wants this pushed down the road. They want that as is to be later. It's defending in the way that you think it is. So I have a buyer, and the buyer goes through and they're looking at the house, and they love it, and they're looking at different things and playing with different things, thinking, I'm going to make an offer. And they look at the refrigerator, and the refrigerator is okay, and they go and look, and there's no ice in the ice maker. And they're like, all right, well, I really want the ice maker to work, so hopefully we'll address this during the home inspection. And they mark home inspection for that report. And so there's this period, this gray area here between the date of offer and that 10th day, the date of the actual home inspection, in which the property the seller can't go back and say, hey, that ice maker didn't work when you made the offer. I'm not addressing it here during a home inspection. It's just the way it was. It's the way it needs to, it's the way that it was as is. The earlier you do this, the less clarity we have in the contract for your buyer. So again, at day 1 through 10, the buyer marks date of the offer, and the seller is going to say, okay, it's going to be as it was the day you made the offer. And if the ice maker was working day 1, that's fine. For the seller, though, they really want it to be this home inspection and say it's going to be what we negotiate in the time and place at the home inspection period. So buyer agents may be putting date of offer. Listing agents may want date of home inspection. The reality is that the two parties may agree to something different, but the buyer is going to have to show proof. And what you've done by putting date of offer here is created a new area of ambiguity and pressure on the buyer. If there is a conflict over when that repair needs to be done, that the buyer is going to have to show what the house's condition was. Now, most of your buyers, and hopefully none of your buyers, are taking picture or video without the seller's consent prior to ratification. But when they're there for the date of offer, or prior to the date of offer even, there's this unlikely world in which they're taking pictures of the ice maker or video when they walk through, right? They're not going to go and do their own home inspection prior to making an offer. And if they don't have that, then what you've done is created a world in which they can say, this ice maker wasn't working or was working at the date of offer. The seller's going to say the date of home inspection, and you've created an unnecessary mess here. Whereas if everybody just agrees to the date of home inspection, then that's what we're inspecting, that's what we have, that's what we agreed to. So there may be a marginal argument that it's better for the buyer to do date of offer, but not really. You've actually muddied the water there. The best thing to do, in my opinion, and that of many people, including those who worked in the forms committee and some attorneys, is really work on some clarity, put the date of offer into home inspection if you're doing a home inspection there. If you're not doing a home inspection, then of course, date of offer, and then you just have to kind of hope and prove that all those things exist. So that's paragraph 10. Now, let's go to the home inspection and radon contingency agreement. And we're going to have some more fill in the blanks. And as I always say, those fill in the blanks are because situations are dynamic. They're not the same. I can't just say use 10 days because everybody's doing it. That is something we have contrived as a reasonable time frame in our industry, but it doesn't have to be. So let me go back to my little graphic here. So let's talk about these dates. Again, they're based on what you have working with your client. And what I hear from a lot of agents is, you know what, I can't get a home inspector in 7 days, especially now that a license is required. There's a few fewer home inspectors than there used to be, and it's hard to get on their calendar, and I really need those 10 days. Plus, if I get on their calendar, I want to do that inspection on day X and then have a day to write it up comfortably or have the buyers talk to contractors or people who are in the know. So let's talk about those dates before we even talk about the language in the agreement. So this is model 1, and this is going to be the home inspection negotiations. This is my made up thing. So we've got a 30-day closing again. I know some of them are 45 days. You can do the math in your own head. So I've got day 1 as ratification. We've come to term agreements. We've signed this addendum. It's ready to go. And I put 10 days for the home inspection. Now, regardless of what numbers you put in for the home inspection due date, remember that the home inspection due date is the buyer must deliver instruments. They must deliver, we'll go through an addendum in a minute, but they have to deliver certain things. All of the things they have to deliver have to be by 9 p.m. on the 10th day. Now, we do a disservice to our buyers very often because we say, okay, there's a 10-day home inspection, and we do the home inspection. We just schedule for day 9 because that's comfortable. Works for the buyers, works for the home inspector, works for me. Great. If we do that home inspection in day 9, that report is due the next day. Your home inspector's job, he's not a contractor. His job is to come in and say, here is all the issues with the house. And the buyer may look at those issues and say, you know, I can live with that or I can't. Or some of them may look at it and go, I have no idea what that means. What does polybutylene pipe? What does pulling it out and replacing it actually mean? Is it dangerous? Is it not? Who does that work? When can it be done? Or the home inspector makes a note and says, you know what? The tax records say 2,000 square feet. The basement appears to be finished. That means it's 3,000 square feet. It means there's probably not a permit. Hopefully you, the agent, have made that point to your buyers to investigate on their own before the home inspector, but nonetheless, it's noted, and the buyer has tons of questions. What does that mean? What's my liability? What do I need to know? If you're doing your inspection on day 9, that gives them basically half a day the next day, hoping that it's a weekday, to get a hold of people and ask questions. To ask questions about whether a radon fan is working and what's the repair cost, and are they too freaked out about this to actually move forward. Instead, what we do is we typically just dump it all on the seller's plate and hope they have some solutions. We're going to get back to the language in just a bit, but that agreement in the home inspection agreement says that the buyer has an obligation to say, here's what's wrong, and here's what I want you to do about it. Not just to note what's wrong and then hope the seller figures it out. They may need more time. So whether you're doing 10 days or fewer, it is better to do that home inspection as close to ratification as humanly possible, even the next day, and give the buyer a day or two to consider what they're worried about and whether they should be, talk to some folks, and then intelligently ask the seller for a list of demands to be met. Regardless of what days those are, you've got, let's say, 10 days, and that's what I'm seeing in most contracts. So from day 1 to 10 is this open area to just schedule and do your home inspection. Then I'm seeing people put 3 days for the negotiation period. Now remember, day 10 at 9 p.m. the day ends. This is when I have, as the buyer agent on behalf of the buyers, to deliver to you the contents of what we want to be repaired. Then the parties, both buyer and seller, have 1, 2, and 3 days under this 3-day part of the paragraph to negotiate back and forth to decide what they want to do. But then there's this weird thing for people who clearly aren't reading the context of this agreement. There is this buyer election period, and I'm seeing people put 10, 3, and 3. Now, that's a throwback from years ago when we had a different home inspection addendum, and there were some back and forth dates. That's not what this agreement says, and hasn't for a number of years now. That buyer election period is simply to say, if the buyer and seller did not agree to terms here in this 3-day negotiations period, then the buyer has X number of days to sit back and go, you know what? I have a choice to either accept the last offer on the table from the seller or to simply void the contract. Now, I don't know why we're giving them 3 days for that. For most average buyers, it's going to take 1 day. This isn't a day for them to collect more information, to continue negotiation, or none of that. It is simply a day for them to not have things thrown at them and to say, I'm either going to void or I'm going to accept what the seller's offering me. Giving them 3 days just moves out your negotiations for no good reason. For me, 1 day is plenty. 1 solid day by 9 p.m. the day after negotiations have ended, the buyer needs to make an election. And look, if the buyer says, I don't want to make an election, I don't like the seller's counter offer, it's crap, and I don't want to void because I like the house, write an addendum saying the parties have they're extending the negotiations period by 2 more days or 3 more days, and get the parties to agree to give more time if they both want to move forward. If the seller says, look, you've gotten your 3 days and you've gotten my answer and I'm not going any further, don't waste everybody's time. Don't keep the house off the market. Don't force the buyers to do things. Simply walk away or accept the seller's counter. This doesn't need to be 3 days. And if you're a listing agent, it is foolish to give them 3 days, because now you have added this up. We're on day 16. We're over halfway through, and we haven't even clarified what in reports that need to be done. And for buyers agents, remember, your buyers' time of the essence and good faith mean something. And so if those parties, the buyers, are dealing with these negotiations, that doesn't stop their requirement to pay for the appraisal and get it done, to start accruing costs, to send it to the settlement company. Because remember the rest of our days. We have 7 days to get it to the settlement company, or 7 days to get the loan application made, rather, and 10 days to get to the settlement company. And they start racking up fees, and they're messing around with these 16 days. It's too long. But let's say we do the full 16. Do we do what I'm seeing over and over again in contracts and seeing 10, 3, and 3? And let's say we come to some agreement on day 16 that says we're going to make these repairs. Well, let's go fast forward here to the walkthrough. Remember, your contract says under the access to property paragraph that your buyers have the right to conduct inspections, plural, 7 days prior to settlement. Now, as a reminder, my advice has always been there are 2 inspections that should be done. The first inspection should be done 7 days prior to closing. That's what the contract, that's why 7 days is in there. So let's say your parties agree to all these terms here, and they want all these repairs. They want to check those repairs, right? So it is reasonable, and we're going to go through this on a different form, to say we want all these repairs we've agreed to be done 7 days prior to closing, because the buyer then has the right to make inspections. Your buyer should, 7 days prior to closing, do the first of 2 walkthroughs. This first walkthrough is to walk through and go, here are the home inspection items. We demanded receipts be delivered and the work to be done 7 days prior to closing, so that we can make sure it's all done. Because if the seller didn't perform, the buyer is dissatisfied with the performance. If you're doing a walkthrough the morning of closing, there is 0 time to rectify these issues. You cannot get a contractor out most of the time. You can't get those things fixed. You can't get back on the schedule of the people who need to make those repairs. You've harmed buyer and seller by not doing this inspection, because you're forcing things to be resolved near closing, where both parties are far more likely to be packed up in U-Hauls, living in hotels, and simply pissed off that they're dealing with issues at the last minute. You've created more drama and more animosity with unresolvable issues, and your only option is to extend closing to get a lot of these things done, which means the package has to be redone. They don't allow escrows. It's a mess. Much better to do it a week prior to closing to sort through the dissatisfaction of the buyer with the seller's performance. And then they get a second walkthrough the morning of closing once everything's moved out of the house to make sure they didn't bust anything up moving their furniture out. So doors, windows, carpet wasn't torn or ripped, house wasn't caught on fire, whatever. So day 7. So if you're going through this process and saying, I want walkthrough to be done 7 days prior to closing to reserve my right and preserve the best interest of all parties, that means you've given 6 days to perform the repairs. So whatever you've agreed to on this 3-day buyer election period, and they're using their 7 day prior to closing, that's 6 days the contractor has to get those repairs done. Most of the time you're not going to find that. You might, but most of the time you probably aren't. A better model, in my opinion, is no more than 7 days, no more than 1 week from ratification. Get that inspection, home inspection report done on day 4 or 5 if all possible. Let the buyers soak in what they found out, be comfortable with it, not be under the gun to come up with last minute decisions. If you put a buyer into the gun and say, okay, we've got to get this addendum together tomorrow to ask the seller to fix it, the buyer's just going to go put everything on there. Let's just ask for everything and we'll see what they say, instead of thoughtfully going through the process of what's reasonable and what they can live with and what they can't. And then 3 days for the negotiation period. I do think 3 days is a good number. It's a couple back and forth. You want a little bit of breathing room, but not too much, so no one's sandbagging. And then 1 day for the buyer's election. So I can't fit this underneath, but really we're on day 11 here. And we have 7 days prior to walkthrough. That remains unchanged. That gives us 11 days. So by making very simple adjustment of 1 day for buyer election and 7 days for home inspection, we've gained almost a week now to get more repairs done and done well. So that's my suggestion on numbers. Of course, if you have a 45-day closing, this may not be as big of an issue with you. If it is, if you truly, and remember, I'm all about critical thinking and thinking it through. If you truly look at the schedule and the home inspector schedule and everybody else, and you know you can't get it done in 7 days, do the 45-day closing. Don't try to force this into 30 days where you're creating unnecessary anxiety for everybody and this hypertension that's going to grow and their blood pressure shoot through the roof because they have that 30-day mark. If you know you can't get a home inspection done in 7 days, this is a good point to say, let's give us all some breathing room. Let's give the loan officer, inspectors, negotiation, repair dates, all push it out to 45 days or longer if your clients agree to it. All right. That's it. That's my visual model on why these days matter. Now let's get what the agreement actually says. So it says the inspection period. This is the time period in which the buyer has to bring in their folks. It's going to end at 9 p.m. on whatever date. So I suggest 7. You can put whatever you need to in there. After the ratification date. And the property needs to be inspected by, and currently it says licensed if applicable, professional or insured inspectors or inspection. This, remember, was written prior to January of 2018, in which now all home inspectors, July, it was actually last year, 2017, all home inspectors as of last July, have to be licensed. So they have to be licensed. That's where you stop here. The rest of the line doesn't matter. They have to be licensed. And they have to be licensed home inspectors. The buyer will direct and the buyer will pay for this. Pursuant to the terms of the contract, seller will have utilities on. So the seller is going to make sure all the utilities are on. These are all utilities. There's a little discussion about this. All utilities that are necessary to inspect core functions of the house. A lot of people are now arguing, and I agree with them being a geek, that internet, for example, is a core utility that should be on in a house. It's something you pay for every month. It's required to make things function. That's certainly not going to be applicable here. It needs to be, if gas is there should be sufficient gas in the tank to check the gas logs. And if that's not the case, if your seller says, look, we emptied the tank, the house has been vacant for 6 months, and we're not turning it on, we're not putting gas in there, the buyer can do it if they want to. That needs to be negotiated during the time of the ratification process. That should not be something that you're randomly going to just tell them later on, because your sellers have committed to have every core utility on that's necessary to move forward. All right, so if for any reason utilities are not in service, this line says if the utilities aren't in service, then the home inspection deadline will be extended until. So you can do whatever you need to do here. So let's say I put 7 days here. I'm going to put pretty darn close to 7 days to rebook. If I'm putting 7 days because I need time to get that home inspector out there, and I need to get on their calendar, and my buyers have busy schedules and they need to take half a day off in the middle of the week to do a home inspection, that probably hasn't changed. When you get to the house with the scheduled home inspection, utilities aren't on. And remember, this date, the second date, is the date that the buyer has already automatically extended, saying if you, the seller, don't have utilities on, we automatically get some more days, 7 more days. And that is going to be, those 7 days occur after the seller has given notice that the utilities are in service. Now remember, notice here that there's a capital N in notice. Remember what we talked about in our core contract training, that if you see a capital N, there's somewhere in the residential sales contract that is defined what notice is. Lowercase n would be me texting you going, hey, utilities are on, go to your inspection. Uppercase N means it's defined. So you need to deliver the notice, a written document on the notice form that the utilities are now on and in service. That triggers the 7 days to the buyer. If you send me a text, I can argue you didn't properly deliver notice. We've got 7 days from when you do. We can push that out as long as we want. All right, so let's say if, and this is, I don't know why this is so confusing, but it seems to be confusing for folks. So let's say that the home inspection is unsatisfactory. The buyer looks at this and says, this house is not cool. I don't like it anymore. That their own discretion, without any other, they don't have to have seller, you don't have to give the seller a chance. The buyer can just simply say, we're done. But the buyer will deliver, remember the capital D, so it has to be delivery under the delivered paragraph. It tells you either it's email or fax or mailing to the house or whatever, to the seller prior to that deadline, prior to 9 p.m. on whatever day you put up here. One of two things, and these are in different parts. The first option is an entire copy of the report. I don't know why I can't just click this paragraph. An entire copy of the report, everything the home inspector submitted, and, that ends being a very important word, and a written addendum listing the specific deficiency, what's wrong, and what the buyer wants done to remedy it. Okay? This is a really important part here. Way too often, what we're seeing is the buyer agent will send over the report and also a list saying, refer to the report on page 5.26 and 6.29 and 11.42. And all they're doing is listing the problems. That's not what is called for in here. All they're saying is, here's some problems, seller. I need you to tell me what you want done. Do you want a credit? Something in this seems trivial, but it's really not. This has really caused a big problem in just a recent transaction. The buyer's agent wrote into the offer, into the negotiation part, seller to paint the rooms. There was 2 rooms to be painted. Seller to paint the rooms, period. The seller delivered a copy before the work was done of the proposal from the painter, which specifically said walls. The buyers do their walkthrough notice that the ceiling is not painted, which they intended to have occurred. Ambiguities in a contract are held against the drafter. Now, I'll talk more about this in another video where we talk about how to structure and write a buyer, on behalf of the buyer, the home inspection report. But it's important here to remember that if I want ceilings painted, I need to put that in there. I need to be specific as to what the remedies are. If I am ambiguous, the seller will do the least amount necessary in a lot of opportunities. And the buyer's going to be mad at you, the buyer agent, for not covering their interest. And not to mention Article 9 of the Realtor Code of Ethics says it is your job as the agent to represent the buyer and put in writing and get agreed to what they, the parties have capitulated on. All right, so this is inspection addendum. There's a specific form for it, and we'll talk about what to do when your message exceeds that form when we do the other video. Or, big capital letters in bold, or Also send an entire copy report and the notice voiding. In both option 1 and 2, there are 2 elements. One is the entire report. That's true in both. And it is also either a list of what the buyer wants fixed and how they want it fixed, or the notice, capital N, voiding the contract. And this is unilateral, and sellers are going to have to suck it up. If the buyer says, I'm not moving forward, they're not moving forward. The buyers are not obligated to say, here are all the reasons we're not moving forward. The buyers can simply say, based on this inspection, we're not done. Now, one of the questions that does come up is, can a buyer do this before they actually get the home inspection done? Nope. 1 and 2 say specifically, the report has to be delivered. Your buyer cannot terminate on home inspection without paying the cost and doing the home inspection. They may do it out on HOA, separate issue. We talked about that in the core contract, in the residential sales contract training. For the buyer, for the home inspection, if they're getting out on home inspection, they need to do the inspection, deliver the report, and the notice to void. If the buyer fails to obtain an inspection, fails to deliver a copy to the seller, or fails to deliver the inspection addendum or notice voiding the contract by the deadline, remember 9 p.m. on whatever date you put up here, the contingencies are going to expire and the contract remains full force effect. No home inspection contingency, move on. I think it's important to note here, though, that that's the home inspection part. The homeowners association stuff is addressed in the residential sales contract. I talked about that in the other video. The home inspection is different than the homeowners association. If the HOA says, I got a bunch of stuff I want you to fix and remedy, that still has to be done, or the seller has to offer to let the buyer remove the contract or void the contract. These are 2 different issues. And if the buyer and seller, let's say the buyer lists something in the home inspection they want repaired, and the seller and buyer agree, okay, we won't do that, and then it comes up later in the HOA, the seller's still going to have to do it. So just something to be cognizant of when you're working through this. So what else with this paragraph? Yeah, okay, so one of the other question is, should I, the listing agent, be reminding the buyer of this deadline? You know, do I have an obligation to let them know? I'm going to say I'm not being sneaky here. I'm not being coy. No, I don't think you, the listing agent, have any, it's not in your seller's best interest for you to nudge and go, hey guys, where's that addendum? Where's that addendum? And very, very frequently I'll talk to agents who are well-meaning, who have said, Matthew, I called this buyer agent for 2 days. We never saw the addendum. They didn't respond to me. The day after the contingency, they send over this report, all these things they want fixed. There's a lot of people who are very confused that there are no such thing as technicalities in the contract. The whole contract is technical. All of it matters. And so they may not have abided by the day and said, okay, we're not going to do this. And then the question is, what do the sellers want to do? If the sellers say, look, we'll entertain it. We don't want them just to walk away. We don't want to be bullies and push them out. That's not all sellers, by the way, but some. You should do an addendum to say the buyer and seller agree to extend the home inspection argument or negotiation period an extra day. There should be some addendum to bridge that gap and give you some context there. All right, negotiation period. Remember, this is what we saw in this little chart here, this second day negotiation period. And again, I think 3 days is plenty for this. In 3 days, by 9 p.m., the buyer and seller need to have some agreement. So they need to find what they want. The buyer has now delivered a copy of the report, all the stuff they want fixed and how they want it fixed. And the seller and buyer go back and forth. At any time, the buyer and sellers can modify or rescind or alter any of their offers and counteroffers until they come up with an agreement. In other words, I'm the buyer agent. I send over this addendum. The seller's sandbagging. The seller's just not doing anything. They're going to sit on it, and they're just going to wait the time out and see what you do at the end of 3 days. And the buyer goes, all right, we were a little aggressive. We ticked off the seller. Let's pull it back and try again. I, the buyer agent, can call you, the listing agent, up and say, hey guys, I'm withdrawing our offer for the repairs. I'm sending you over a new one with fewer repairs. I don't have to wait for the seller to respond. The buyer can pull it back and they can add more too. And that actually happens a lot. I got a call a couple days ago from an agent who was really, really upset. Like, I was sharing my blood pressure medicine with them. They were so upset. Okay, I offered to, they didn't take it. Just to be clear, in case anybody at FTA is watching. They were pretty upset. And they're like, Matthew, they sent us over this report. It wasn't so bad. Then they called us and said, forget that one. We're sending over another one. And they got worse. They can't do that. Yeah, they absolutely can. This is giving right to go back and forth and all they wish. At the end of that 3-day period, there's then the buyer's election period. And as it says, if the parties are not able to reach an agreement, if you don't have everybody signing off by 9 p.m. on the third day, the buyer has the option to void this contract by delivering notice to the seller by within 1 day. All right, this is the negotiation period. And what we've done is we've reintroduced this. If they didn't get what they wanted, they can come back and do this. We had to answer that question somewhere, right? We had to come back and say, what happens if they do option 1 and the sellers and buyers can't come to an agreement? Then we give them buyer election and go, we got 1 more day that you can think about what you've done. If you don't like it, you can go void the contract. Okay. It's a lot of words for 1 page, isn't it? Number 2 is another option. This is the home inspection with option to void only. For years, we had this nonsensical phrase called home inspection for informational purposes only. And it's dumb. And actually, I still see it coming out. This has always been a pet peeve of mine. Home inspection for informational purposes only. Why do a home inspection? You're going to know what is wrong with the house after you've moved in. So if it's truly for information, if it's truly because you just want to know, then you can know after you moved in. There's no reason to have that. A lot of people who wrote that would assert that that meant that the buyer had a right to void if they didn't like it. Basically what they were saying, informational purposes only, is to simply state that if I don't like what I find, I can terminate. It just means that I'm not going to bother you with trying to negotiate seller. Well, that's not what it said. It said informational purposes only. And again, we have contrived or developed some ideology behind something that's not a legal defined word. It's not clear term. Judges are not going to uphold it. It's just not powerful. So we came up with a better option in paragraph 2. So to give an option for those instances where you really want the seller to understand that you're not going to come back and ask them for anything, I simply want the inspection to know if I'm moving forward or not and simplify the process. We have option 2 now. So the first paragraph is pretty much the same as the first paragraph of option 1. We want 7 days to do the home inspection. If you don't have your utilities on, we want 7 days from the time you give us notice. If we don't like what's going on, we are simply going to give you notice and terminate the agreement. If we don't respond by 9 p.m. on the 7th day, contract moves forward. It's that simple. Now, one thing I will say about this paragraph is that I don't personally find a lot of use for it. If you're doing a home inspection and I come back and go, I don't like these 3 things, these 3 maybe petty things, maybe it's $500 to repair them, and the buyer just doesn't want to fix them and gets out because they've had these issues. The seller may have been perfectly willing to address those issues, and they may never even know about it. If you're going to do an inspection, why not just do the inspection and ask the seller, hey, are you willing to fix these things? If not, we're out of here. Why not give them that option? So I don't know that there's a lot of value here in the mind of the buyer. What I see happen often is that the buyer does give notice and the seller goes, whoa, why are you getting out? What's wrong with the house? And it's like a $1,000 repair. And they're going, oh, okay, we'll do that. And what was the point of all this? So this was here to placate those people who thought there was some value in informational purposes only. We want to give a legal context to it, make it something that is enforceable, as opposed to just that generic phrase. And I just recently saw an agreement where they actually crossed through all of this and still put informational purposes only. Well, that's what this is. Read the contract. Okay. Radon testing. So radon testing is a little bit different, but the numbers are roughly the same. Most of your people who do home inspection also generally do the radon testing, but their test kit often has to be picked up a couple of days later. So if I've got 7 days of my home inspection, I may want to put 9 days for my radon, may give them 2 days after the home inspection if they're dropping off the kit. This requires you to do a little planning, right? As a buyer agent, you should really think ahead. Dear home inspector, you're doing this inspection on day 5. Can you go drop off your kit on day 3 and then pick it up the day of the home inspection? A lot of your home inspectors, if you ask and you make arrangements with the seller to do that, will do just that. That is better for them to drop it off early and pick it up the day of the home inspection than it is to do the home inspection and then come back 2 days later to get the equipment. Okay. Let me do this real quick. Nope, that's on. Okay. All right. So we got 9 days here. If for any reason utilities are not in service, radon deadline will be extended until, again, however many days you need. Maybe it's 5 if you want to do something random. And sometimes the question is asked, what does utilities have to do with radon? Well, normal airflow in the house for like heating and air conditioning could have some type of alteration to the radon test. So we want normal airflow in a normal home. It's better for the seller and buyer to know what those readings are normally. All right, and then the testing guidelines. Let me go back and say this. This is important. The property is inspected for the presence of radon and receiving a report, the radon report, and from the test by a professional certified by these groups, by the National Radon Safety Board, NRSB, or the National Radon Proficiency Program, NRPP. Not everybody is certified by those two things. Matter of fact, we've had a couple issues where the home inspector was certified by some entities, some of which I've never heard of before, and was doing the home inspection. These are the two groups that the Forms Committee, after about a year's worth of investigation, said this was the standard, that no one else met quite those standards. And this is also the norm. For most of your radon testers, they've got one of these two EPA granted certifications. So you need to ask as a buyer's agent, when you're hiring or recommending the home inspector, if they're doing this radon testing, are you an RSB or NRPP? Maybe even send over a copy of it to make sure you're in compliance. If it's not a home inspector and it's just, there are other people who do radon tests, also ask them. And again, I would ask them for a copy of their certifications. Again, the utilities have to be on, and if they're not, we have extra days. All right. At the end of the test period, well, this is actually, B is for the seller, and this is to say, look, there's going to be 12 hours prior to the test and throughout the duration of the test. Your windows have to remain shut. Doors can only be used for normal ingress and egress, and the whole house exhaust fans or smaller fans near the device have to not be used. So if you have like a Dyson fan like I have in my office, that shouldn't be on or near the testing equipment. So for 12 hours prior to this is scheduled. So your sellers should be given notice that you're sending somebody out. So if you're going to do on day 3, drop off the test so it's available on day 5 for the inspection, 12 hours at a minimum before that's being dropped off, the sellers need to know. Make sure your windows are closed. Make sure you only use the doors. A lot of this equipment is sophisticated enough to kind of tell you if they're trying to game it. If windows are open for extended period, or doors and the outside air is coming in, or if the machine has been moved or knocked over or unplugged and replugged. They've got tons of sensors in there to make sure it's not being screwed with. If the radon professional, and this is also pretty strong language, if the radon professional says the requirements haven't been met, the seller is going to pay for the new test. So this is merely on the word of the radon professional. So if you have the NRPP or the NRSB that says, look, someone's been screwing my equipment, or they left windows open or doors open, or they put a fan in front of it, generally they'll be able to show you how they know that, maybe a report from the instrument itself. If they deliver that notice and say, look, something was wrong, somebody screwed with this, now it becomes the seller's job to pay for it. If the seller refuses, they're probably going to be, and again, we never say you are in default, but they're probably going to be in default of contract for not performing unless they can show there was some nefariousness and the inspector was paid off to do this for whatever reason. And the contingency will be automatically extended until X number of days after the seller notifies buyers that the requirements are in place, generally 3 days, because it takes 1 or 2 days for the inspection to happen. If the radon system shows that the number is equal to or higher than what EPA says is safe, then again, like the home inspection, there are 2 options. One is we're out. Found radon, it's over the 4.1 or whatever it is. That number is too high. It's 5. We don't care if you can mitigate it. We're just done. They can give notice and get out. That's all that's needed. You may still be working on a home inspection negotiations if you did the days wrong, and now they're just terminating because they found out that there's a potentially cancer causing agent in the house. The other option, so that's option 2. The first option is Here's a copy of the whole report, and we have a written addendum, and the seller at their expense is going to mitigate the radon condition with whatever is referenced by the NRSB or NRPP certified person, and a buyer a written retest result. This one, for some reason, is frequently missed by listing agents. So if your seller agrees to install the mitigation equipment, it needs to meet the recommendations of the certified professional who did the test or a certified professional. They must also deliver to the buyer a retest result by someone the buyer selected to do the test. So very often, the person who did the original radon test, the buyer's going to say, yeah, we want them to retest. But the seller's paying for the retest and must deliver the results. Now, some of these folks will go to Lowe's and pick up their little canister, the radon test canisters that are nowhere near sophisticated as the instrument and equipment that your radon inspector is bringing in. That's not the same. The buyer chooses, the seller pays for, but the test results must be delivered to go to closing. Now remember, back to my earlier chart, you got 7 days prior to closing, this all should be due. If the buyer doesn't do all the things they're supposed to in the time frame, the contingency goes away. If they don't deliver on by 9 p.m. on whatever dates they've mentioned, they move forward. If the seller refuses to fix this after the buyer's requested it, then the buyer has a day, or however many you enter in there, a number of days to simply go, we're out. You could put, I'm sorry, yeah, that should be here. Never mind, let me go back. Just like the home inspection, this could be a couple of days. Honestly, I'm really skimpy on these days too, because I'm trying to line them up with the home inspection time frame. I don't want this to go forever and ever. The seller is probably going to say, look, I need to talk to some people. I need to find out from mitigation companies how much it'll cost. What I need to do. Mitigation is not overly expensive. Honestly, almost always it's under $1,000, sometimes under $1,500. This is one of the few items I will say the seller needs to know that if they don't fix it for this buyer, they have got to disclose it to the next buyer until it's resolved. So it's unusual for a seller to say, no, I'm not going to resolve it. I don't know that you need 3 days for this. And if they do, you can negotiate that if it comes up. So I would go 2 and 1 here. And that's it. That's home inspection and radon. Now, the next video will be how do I write up the report when I find all this stuff wrong. This is simply going through the addendum and the meaning of it. So I know this is a long video. Sorry, it is a complicated one. It is tons of problems in there. So I want to make sure I got everything out of the way, from deadlines to what it means. And if you have any questions, reach out to your brokers. They'll be happy to help you. Thanks.